Zoom recording if that's okay with everybody. Hmm. And this, my friends, is the things that talent practitioners think about Roundtable. This is our June offering. And frankly, it is all about an opportunity, I think, in the events at TalentTelligent for us to nerd out a little bit. And we created this specifically for people who wanted to geek out. Definitely those who were early in their career. I mentioned some of the people that I'm coaching are focused on, gee, I never learned that. I didn't learn that in school. But we are getting a lot of Pearson veterans in our fields who love to discuss seminal research and think about what's happening around some of these major topics. So everybody is welcome, whether you are a veteran or you're a new to the field or maybe didn't study it in school. But that's really the intention behind this practitioner's webinar. And I might also mention there is an added event to our calendar on June 29th, where actually Bob Eichinger and Garrick Throckmorton, our colleagues, are talking about all of the tools and how to gain access to them. So if you need to get maybe that foundational story, I think, Marie, that might be very appropriate for you with your questions to steer you there. That's happening on Tuesday, the 29th. And again, it's a complimentary thing that you get straight from one of our co-founders as well, and is one of our colleagues. Today, we're talking about my favorite topic, and that is best practices around 360. And what we hope to do is create a forum and a discussion, and we'll discuss, I think, about 5 or 6 different main best practices and where they come from around 360 feedback, coaching, that kind of stuff. And in general, the intention around this things talent practitioners think about is to be able to take a deep dive into seminal research, which is influential, has changed the industry. And so you can expect older citation dates to that. And I have one of the newest research-based tools from 360s and the most current thinking at our disposal as well. So that's what I'd like to explore today around our 360, the seminal offerings, as well as some of the latest, greatest validated research around that, to have that conversation. I would challenge you, and this is more often for our junior folks or new to the offering, is you might want to challenge yourself, and I'd like for this to have a deliverable to it. And that's, if you had 60 seconds to summarize our discussion today, how would you summarize using a research-based, or I'll say best practice, 360 development? If fate placed you directly in an elevator, and I hope I see elevators in our future, actual conversations happening, and what would you say about it if you had to have a quick soundbite? What seminal authors might you casually work into the conversation? And here's to hoping that we're doing that relatively soon. But I would love for you to figure out what your elevator pitch is around 360, because we have a huge opportunity to influence people around how to do this and do this well. So please mute and open your lines during the broadcast. I think we're a small enough group to be able to have this conversation. Know that we are recording. I think Zoom might have even asked you if you wanted to click and know that we're recording. So that's some of the security measures that are happening there. And she certainly made that announcement. I would love for you to open your chat panel right now and then leave it open on the screen for you, and tell us, your name, where you're at, and what is your affiliation with 360. How are you connected to 360s? Why is this interesting for you? And leave that chat panel open. I'd love to be able to keep the conversation going in the chat panel. I've got a number of questions for you that are chat panel worthy. And you will receive a copy of this deck following our broadcasts. As interested, I'll PDF that for you and send that out so that you've got all of the, I would say the citations are the most interesting around our roundtable conversations. So please do open your chat panel, say hi, say what city you're coming from, your connection to 360. And we'll watch that as we go. And I will watch that and collect comments and questions throughout that broadcast. There will be a time at the end where we'll just open it up and have a conversation based on this information. And I'll of course tee up what next time would be. Great. Thank you guys for doing that. Okay, so my name is Lisa Marie Hanson. My friends call me LM, my initials. So feel free, however you want to roll in the chat panel. And I am Chief Learning Officer and an associate at TalentTelligent. And I have been a coach for the majority of my career as a talent practitioner. I've been inside organizations, about 15 years, and within consulting in large firms within about 15 years as well. So, add that up. And I've done over, I'm going to say, I was doing a little count for a client I was talking to a couple weeks ago, over 500 different deliveries of 360. And that is notably in two key tools. One is called Voices, and one is the Korn Ferry Leadership Architect 360. And in fact, I have been following 360s for the majority of my career, both at Lominger, which we started to talk about as the precursor to TalentTelligent, and the work of Eichinger and his second act with his partner and co-founder Roger Pierman, and the crew that is here in Minneapolis and in Winston-Salem. And welcome Dan. Dan is a colleague as well at TalentTelligent. And from a facilitation standpoint, I have spent the majority of my career facilitating practitioner certifications about how to read different instruments, how to look at assessments and analyze them and deliver on a solid 360 that can be a game changer. And I did that primarily for about 10 years, again, in Voices and in the Korn Ferry Leadership Architect 360, which is the shorter version of the Lominger 67 competencies. As Dan was talking to you earlier, Marie, Korn Ferry chose to take out the attributional, more personality-based items out of what is known as their current 360 and make that a shorter summation. Now, I can very comfortably talk about those because I worked there for a number of years, but also that baby was created by our co-founder, Robert Eichinger. So I'd like to be able to talk about the thought process behind a number of tools and why they exist in the marketplace today. Okay, here's the first chat panel thing. So why did you join today? What's your experience? Again, looking at our audience for a broadcast like this, are you new to the talent field? Put an A in the chat panel, or as many letters as apply to you. Maybe you're in the talent field and you never really studied this or development in school or university. Maybe you're an experienced practitioner who just loves a really good, robust discussion. Maybe you know me, maybe you're a friend of mine and you're joining and you like TalentTelligent. You could be letter E, and that's a total nerd. And I love that one. And maybe there's something else, obviously, depending on your identity with 360. You can go ahead and write that too. Good. Oh, good. Great. Okay, how are you connected to 360s? Are you working for a company that uses 360s currently? Are you a practitioner who wants to get a process going in your organization? Are you currently a 360 coach? Do you plan to be one in the future? Are you certified in other science-based marketplace tools? When I say marketplace, I'm usually looking for the things that are research-based and very well known and validated within the context of good best practice. Maybe you don't like 360s and you're trying to figure out where that fits in the world, or maybe something else. Great. Thank you. Good. Wonderful. Okay, well, I do have to have a disclaimer here, and in full transparencies, we really like these guys, the guys that you're seeing on the screen. You will find that I try to take pictures or grab snags of most researchers, just because that solidifies their voice in my head. And these two voices are very big in my head. They have guided me throughout my experience as a practitioner, a client, and a person who certified others through Lominger and certainly Korn Ferry, and also they're in my head today about what we think about. So it's a lens that's been shaped by Robert Eichinger, Roger Pearman, and at the bottom here is Michael Lombardo. Michael Lombardo has also contributed quite a great amount to the research behind what CCL did in 360s, what Lominger did in 360s, and certainly what TalentTelligent is doing going forward. In fact, he came out of retirement to talk to us about what's happening in our world and this great second act. I would say these guys are good guys. This is their second act. We have a 360 that has been going on for about 3 years now that I absolutely love in comparison to all of the tools that I've worked with as a coach. And it is the best that I've seen. And I will leave a little bit of time to do that. But I want to focus on the context and topic of this. But in transparency, these voices are pretty big for me. And here's all of the books that are written, just, well, not all, actually, not all of the books that are written by those guys. But I would say to you, these might be already on your shelf. So whether it's Pearman's I'm Not Crazy, I'm Just Not You, or Hardwired Leadership, to this one's pretty popular out there, the FYI series, and you're going to see different versions of this from the original Lominger 67 to the latest 38 to this, I'm going to say seminal research from 1993 called The Leadership Machine by Eichinger and Lombardo. And some of the stuff on the right-hand side are the Pearman-Eichinger collaboration around development books. And so these guys are pretty prolific in terms of writing and looking at tools. And this tool right here is one of my favorites from a coaching standpoint. It has the neural leadership that Dan started to talk about before we hit record and adds a lot of development information for us as coaches. Last time, which was March, we geeked out and we talked about behaviors and competencies and knowledge, skills, and attributes, and some of the seminal research. And I want to call out the red thread that infers. There's a red thread that goes from what you're going to measure to the how you measure it in 360. So the red thread is a core idea or a theme, the through line, the thing that makes it all more, and it makes it come alive. And we're going to talk about shifting from competencies or knowledge, skills, and attributes or behaviors, the thing that's science based, to measure. So I just wanted to acknowledge that connection. And those of you who were on the broadcast last March know that we talked a lot about seminal authors and research around where did competencies come from and how did they get noticed and how did assessment centers look at them and where do success profiles come from. Without this connection, 360 really wouldn't exist. We'd have a bunch of questionnaires on things that maybe wouldn't matter or tie back to things. So I want to acknowledge the very important connection to behaviors, competencies, knowledge, skills, and attributes, a success profile on which to layer on a 360. So, I couldn't tell you I had a training background if I didn't want to say there was a pop quiz involved. And so we did talk about Pearman, we talked about Eichinger, we talked about David Mclaughlin, we talked about Signe and Lyle Spencer, we talked about Prahalad and Hamill, we talked about Mark Uslid down here, and you can see I love to snag pictures of those guys. And important people who contributed to the competency piece. So pop quiz. Who was the researcher who created what's known as the Q method, ranking items to capture what people think about ideas in relationship to other ideas rather than in isolation. Relative comparison is another term for that. Go ahead and use your chat panel and tell me what you think is the right answer here. Dun, dun, dun. Nerdy people who contributed to the larger grouping of science-based items, but in relative comparison, which in itself creates a term of validation. So come on, be brave, chat panel, let's go. Is it Stevenson, Mclaughlin, Spencer? There's two Spencers there, actually. Eichinger. That's fair, thank you. Ah. Well, let me help you out here a little bit. It is indeed William Stevenson. Let's look at his picture. There he is. And William Stevenson created this thing that's called the Q. It was a form of factor analysis. So he was looking for correlations between things. And the impact that it had was it was using a comparison and a rank, if you will, to be able to show the difference between items. Now, this becomes really important in 360 when we start talking about how behaviors are high for someone, middle for someone, low for someone. With the old adage, everybody's got a high in 360, everybody's got a middle, everybody's got a low. If we just dealt with means, we would have the muddiest report ever. If you just said, well, and that's a 3.52 for you, Marie, and the next one is a 3.54 for you. So good on you. You're 0.2 better in that behavior doesn't become super meaningful. But the idea of being able to compare and contrast busts through a lot of things. Now, Stevenson talked about this in 1953. I'm happy to say I wasn't even born yet. But it's pretty cool when you think about the impact of it. And Brown revitalized this in 1993 to really talk about how this impacts what we do. And what we do in many cases is card sorting. So this whole card sorting methodology came from Stevenson and the idea that you could create a common language by putting actual terms in someone's hands and having them make decisions about them from this pile to that pile, which is very different than using a 5-point Likert scale and gets you past some of the, let me say leniency bias or inflated scores that oftentimes traditional 360s do. So I'm happy to say some of the latest thinking, certainly by Pearman and Eichinger, are adding this sorting methodology, being able to do relative comparison and do a user experience that isn't clicking a 5 for Joni and a 5 for her here and another 5 for that, maybe a 4 for this one, and having this rainbow tight unicorn range kind of thing in 360s. This methodology of sorting cards is actually inside of our 360 to be able to get at a nice relative comparison. And I think Stevenson would be thrilled. So I did send you a link to that Geeky First recording that talks about the seminal authors, and I couldn't. I think this is the least I've mentioned David Mclaughlin in a long time, but I would say if you're interested in looking at the what is put into 360s, please take a listen to the recording that we did last March. Okay. 360, everybody's talking about it. ATD just a couple weeks ago had this cool article, vlog kind of thing around translating 360 into real professional growth. If you Googled on LinkedIn, you would see tons of stuff around 360. Marshall Goldsmith is doing a bunch of free webinars with his coaching experience of a lifetime in hindsight. He is trying to leave something good, and he's talking a lot about the importance of feedback, 360 feedback. He actually calls it feed forward, and I love the concept that we're thinking about the future in all of this. The book in the center, The Leadership Machine, and there's my little iconography that says here's a citation, and you will see citations for all the things that I talk about in here. Leadership Machine is by Eichinger and Lombardo, and the citation is 1993. And the Leadership Machine actually has a full chapter on 360 best practices. And that was what was happening back in the day, and those things are still pretty prevalent now with an interesting twist. The interesting twist that I would like to offer to everybody is not just one article, but 800. 800, and I think that's even conservative in the book that you see on the screen. But this big heavyweight here called the Handbook of Strategic 360 Feedback by Church, Bracken, Fleener, and Rose, with a foreword by Goldsmith, which is the 2019, probably most up-to-date tool that synthesizes most of the prevalent work in 360. And quite honestly, before I even worked on our certifications at TalentTelligent, Eichinger made this required reading for me before I even put my hands on the PowerPoint in order to think about what's happening. So I'm going to speak to a lot of the research in here with multiple authors, and I'll have a full list of citations. Absolutely. It's pretty fun. I have to say, I do enjoy this part of my role is reading. A lot of people ask me what fiction did I read, and I usually laugh. I'd love to read fiction, but never really get to it. Okay, so I want to level set. What is 360? Is it an assessment? It's not a psychometric assessment, but it's still considered an assessment of how you show up to people around you, how your behaviors manifest and stand out on the job, and people have a point of view about it and how you show up at work. And that point of view is in the eye of the beholder. And for decades, the purpose has been for development. There was this hideous swing in performance management that went to 360 as a lever for performance management. And our 2019 authors acknowledge the need for using a purposeful point of view for 360, and that it isn't always just for development. It's never just without its merit to look at what else could it be. So in general, I will reflect and channel my best by Bob Eichinger and say, for the most part, it's for development. And I'll show you some of the other uses of that as we move on. Self-ratings are collected, but they're not included in the overall aggregate because we want to compare self and self-reflection and self-awareness to the aggregate of all others. So it's usually a benchmark and not just rolled into the data. You can get short-term development, you can get long-term development. You should be using some comparison diagnostic tool. It doesn't matter that Marie is a 4.52 or 4.54. It matters if she's above the norm or below the norm. It matters if she's good at what matters to her job. It matters if she is good at the most powerful or performance related kinds of behaviors. So there's usually a companion diagnostic tool that a coach will use in order to interpret it. The day where someone just pulls your report up on their screen and says, oh, look at that, look at that, look at that, and hasn't prepped for it are less helpful. Sometimes it's a call to action. Sometimes it is a wake-up call that people need. Sometimes there's crying. Sometimes there is pride. A lot of times there's pride. A lot of times it is hearing a story. And for coaches, there's no greater privilege than hearing the story of someone who's had 360 and spending that time on it. It has a big impact on career and brand and self-awareness, and I think it's an absolute game changer. So I just wanted to level set. This is a common and universal definition of 360. Where we diverge from 360 is we don't have a one size fits all perspective. And we believe that individual contributors are very discrete, have very discrete behaviors and things they are supposed to do compared to supervisors or managers, compared to leaders leading an enterprise. So we have a three library perspective that could be put into 360s. And as the research of 2019 also talks about, is that there's an impact on teams when there's 360. We have a 360 that applies to teams. And 360 is oftentimes used for high potential identification. We have a 360 on that, as well as an assessment that then looks at some primary scoring tools from a prediction standpoint. So I just wanted to say assessments, yes, this is a perspective-based assessment is how I think the British Psychological Association would want me to describe that to you. Terms in general are universal. People say things in any tool they're working with. This is multi-rater. There's aggregate or averaged data. Self is typically not included in that aggregated data. It becomes important later. There's something called spread or agreement to see if you show up differently to one group or one constituency rater group than another. And that could be in the form of agreement, which I think is the mainstream of many tools. At TalentTelligent, we're using the term spread right now, I think from a differentiation standpoint. There is anonymity that is provided to some groups, we'll talk more about in a second. There are things called blind spots and hidden strengths. Blind spots are typically things where I say I'm all that in a bag of chips, and people say, no, not really. And it's a big difference. And it's typically on the bottom of my data in order to be called a blind spot, something that's developmental that I can't see, or maybe I choose not to see. Hidden strengths are exactly the opposite. It's places where I say, oh no. Oh, Marie, that was my Minnesotan accent right there. Oh no. I'm not that good at that. And everybody says, yes, you are. And it's usually a significant amount of difference, maybe greater than 1 point, depending on the tool. And it should be on the top of your data. It should actually be a strength to be called a hidden strength, just because you think you are less good at something on the bottom of your data that is greater than a 1 point difference would not necessarily be a strength. We also think a lot about developmental difficulty and how hard something is to think about and develop, and that is included in many of the tools throughout the arc of 360, certainly here, and the ones that I have worked with. Now, here's my book club recommendations. How many of you already have Leadership Machine on your bookshelves? Yeah, I'm seeing that. If not, yeah, there we go. This one is handed out. I'm going to tell you in almost every certification we certainly did across the organizations I've worked for, and these guys are pretty amazing. You'll see the citation for this. I know you can get it used on Amazon too. This book, of course, I had to grab the pictures of Church and Bracken and Fleener and Rose, and a little bit of the foreword from Marshall Goldsmith that basically says this is a synthesis of essays. There are fantastic topics happening in this book, whether or not it's using 360 for decision making by Campion and Campion. Maybe it is using 360 for foundational feedback. That's Macaulay and Brutus. How does personality show up in 360? That's Rob Kaiser. How would we use 360 as a criterion predictor? That's Blakis. So anything really in depth, you're going to see a lovely abstract for and a beautiful conclusion. There's a lovely index by topic, by author, and as I mentioned to you, over 800 different citations for this book. And I'm going to just call this out. This is Oxford Press 2019, which I think is the most current synthesis of multi-research based perspectives out there. So I'm loving on this book. Okay, blah, blah. That's LM talking here. So I would love for Marie, if you will open up your mic. I won't make you do anything too scary other than pick a category. So we have some categories we can talk about in terms of best practices, maybe some adaptations that organizations are making to these things. And we've got who should select raters. We've got who gets to see the 360 report. We've got, do you send the report to the person ahead of time? Do you go ahead and do group delivery because it's a more expedient way to get 360 feedback across? Are there groups that really require some confidentiality or anonymity protection? That fabulous comments section I've always said I love and I hate it. And then this is a new thing we've been talking about, prescriptive development suggestions. So I would love to frame this in the form of some best practices. So Marie, what interests you most? We'll cover all five of or what seven of these or so. But which one should we go to first?
Well, now you have my curiosity, so let's go with prescriptive development suggestions. Since Tim
Ooh.
is more seasoned than me, let's give him some new stuff sooner than later.
No worries about that. Okay. So, friend or foe in your chat panel, I'd love to know, what do you think? Computer driven generated development suggestions. So that's where you turn to the front page and it says Lisa Marie needs to work on these three things as statistically generated in her report. Is that a best practice? Is that a good thing? Is it help? Those of you with coaching experience, take a second and give me a point of view in the chat panel. Yeah, Dan, I think it's over 800 citations. It's pretty amazing. They didn't just make this up in their basement, is a nice way to say all that. Yeah. It's interesting. There is a great debate on this. Thank you for doing that. Let me see if I can get here. So computer generated development suggestions. What we're talking about are those prescriptive development suggestions. Maybe it's a list of three things generated by the computer. Many coaching roundtables, coaching user groups, and even some of the webinars I've been on by the notables I mentioned to you just a bit ago say they often miss the mark. And typically they reflect only statistically generated ideas. So let's say we're going to say, what's the largest gap? Well, Lisa Marie got a 15 or on the 15th percentile, we're going to subtract that 15 from the 99th percentile and decide which is the biggest gap and spit that out. So there's something prescriptive that gets sent from the computer, and it could be either um, the biggest gap in percentile in a score, or it could be, oh, you must work on these because it's low for you and it's high in importance. There are so many people who think they don't reflect the pain point an individual is actually experiencing and or the nuance you might hear. I'm working on a coaching project right now that is focusing on some very experienced people in the second part of their careers. And it's interesting to hear their stories. But the pain point, in my experience, is never really the thing that was blinking orange or low for them in most of the tools. It's the burr under their saddle of something they've been feeling about themselves for the last 15 years and how it shows up. So we truly believe that coaching involves nuance. We truly believe that professional coaches are in the best position to identify the things that resonate with people and provide a point of view about possible things to develop. Every coach who gets certified in the tools made by our founders are asked to at least have analyzed the report and have a longer list of things that they would say you might work on. But throughout the session, when they're delivering the feedback, they might prove or disprove or circle it or take it off the table, because not everything that is statistically generated is the thing that resonates with folks. So let me just ask you to open your mics for 1 second and tell me, what do you think about that?
I had this conversation with Roger yesterday.
Oh,
Because it's not uncommon to, let the data drive what's important, especially when we're trying to follow what the boss thinks.
yeah.
Right.
Yes.
The only nod I'll give to the strengths movement, not a big fan, is that when we are asked to develop something that is important and important to the organization, but we have little interest in and no motivation to do anything differently about, assigning that as a prescriptive developmental challenge is going to fail.
Yeah.
So I know our founders are adamantly opposed to letting the data drive the prioritization of what needs to be developed and in what order.
Yeah. Thank you. Wow, our time is flying here. I want to jump back here. Thank you, Dan. Tim, you want to pick one? The prescriptive development suggestions is taken. Everything else is fair game.
Who gets to see the 360 report?
Oh, dun, dun, dun. Let me say this a different way. Who owns the report? And should the boss have a line of sight to the 360 report, the data, the coaching conversation, and the session happenings itself? Go ahead and let me know in the chat panel. Weigh in. What's your point of view? Yeah. Tim, you sound like a lawmaker guy. I agree with that. So when we talk about this, the best practice is the learner owns the report. Now, I want to say that with a grain of salt, because not every organization chooses to do this. So the question happens here is, what do I get from an organizational standpoint? If I pay, I don't know, $265, certainly in our world, or I pay $600 for someone to get a 360 in another world, the organization wants some sort of result. And in best practice, the organization gets the result of development or growth. And if results are made public, we do know ratings go up, they get inflated, and they are less related to job performance. And I have a citation for that one as well in a research study. This is a fun, sad fact from 2000 by the Rogers Group, and they reported that 50% of orgs or bosses have access to the reports. Now you'll notice my little icon on the bottom here is the Grim Reaper. I think the minute that becomes public, the Grim Reaper, and we know that old adage, people don't leave organizations, they leave bad managers. And I think bad managers can tend to do some things that are inappropriate with 360 data. They remember it, they reprise it in a performance review. So it should be done for good, not evil. We do know that boss standing alone, and we'll talk more about standing alone, has caused boss responses to be higher on average. And that is a Macaulay study, 1994, and again is reprised in the 2019 literature. And a majority of people do not want their bosses to have their actual data. If it's required, data gets inflated, less comments are made. You can tell if somebody doesn't like their boss, or you can tell if there's tension or there's fear in the comments section. Many line managers really don't understand why they can't have access. And they think, well, if I hold the keys to development, if I'm a development partner, I should be holding that data. No. The organizational adaptation for this tension is a deliverable of some sort. And in fact, I have a client who's doing this really well. They are asking that all of the people they invest in have a conversation with their boss in the form of here's what I learned about myself. I don't have to trot out my report. In fact, as their coach, I recommend they don't. Or they're doing some sort of learning commitment and individual development plan, depending on where they are in the organization. We love a tune-up plan for an executive or a person farther down the road in their career, because they're ratcheting up what they might need to, and that's more of a tune-up, and you'll see that in our DIY tools. And some organizations are very happy with a group aggregate report, where all 40 learners in the leadership development program get aggregated, and I can see a pattern of behavior among my leaders, among this division, among this group, this cohort, and that becomes the get in the investment here. But the best practice there is that the learner owns the report. Otherwise, you do, and I couldn't help but put the Grim Reaper on my slide here. You really can sully a good process by making that data more public or shared with boss. Cool. Dan, you want to play?
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
Feel free to comment or heinously argue with me in the chat panel. I'm just managing our time.
Yes, I will do that in the chat panel. Let's go for group delivery for expedience sake.
Ooh, this
For
is a big
200,
one.
Alex.
I used to have things, points assigned to this one. So tell me in the chat panel, is this a best or worst practice? To manage our budget, we do a full group session explaining how to read the 360 report, because we really can't afford one-on-one coaches. Our budget's tight. And then we distribute the report right there in the meeting for people to open up and see their own results privately. Maybe they could chew on it for a few minutes, and maybe we make people available if anybody has any reaction to it, but that's how we do it at Acme Corporation. Yeah. Dun, dun, dun. This is really, really tough. Yeah. Group deliveries or sending the report without comment or coaching for an individual is a worse practice. We think the best practice is that people receive their reports in a one-on-one with a trained facilitator or coach. There is damage, and if our co-founder Eichinger were on this call, I think he'd be yelling right now about the damage and the perspective that you can really, really injure a person and their self-worth, as well as waste your organizational motion on if reports aren't interpreted accurately. And yes, it is time consuming to deliver one-on-one feedback session, but it's an investment. You can get such lift. You can be a game changer in someone's career. Group sessions are especially dangerous if an individual opens their report after the mini presentation and sees something critical that they may not be able to interpret, or maybe something that they see as, I don't know, chronic. Imagine opening your medical report in a group setting where your doctor's going, oh, and here's your x-ray, and here's your Xylem. Scary. So here's an organizational adaptation. Many organizations still have a group meeting where the sponsor gets up and says, this is why we like 360. This is our purpose. We're behind it. We're behind you. Here's the deliverables we're going to ask of you. You have a conversation with your manager. And here's what the report looks like in general navigation of a sample report, which might save the coach time. You tell me. I don't know that it saves me tons of time in my spiel, but because I want to look at certain things and pull on certain threads. But sometimes organizations do it and feel like, well, then I can give my coach 45 minutes instead of 90 minutes. I'm not a fan of this, but it is an organizational adaptation that works better than the worst practice that initiated this idea. Yeah, Dan, this always comes up. Let's do one more and then we'll hit the piece of this. Tim, what do you got? We've got who should select raters, send the report in person to the person ahead of time. Should rater groups have anonymity or a comment section?
Comments can be tricky.
Comments. Dun, 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 they can be. Let's go there. Okay, do you love them or hate them? Chat panel, please. We're talking about the Joni wrote all of this long paragraph about the person she was rating, or Ray went ahead and said, I think she's the greatest thing since sliced bread, in the comments section. Love them or hate them? Ah, very good. There's ways they work and ways they can work better. All right, so here's my pinch with them. Narrative notes, they're popular. They can hurt as much as they help. So here's my comment. You're the best thing since sliced bread. Yay, I've seen that written. Or something absolutely caustic, brazen, bombastic can be written. The coach needs to have read every single comment ahead of time to know what's in there and to understand the tenor. And the day that I read, I don't know why Debbie opens her mouths in meetings, because she is so stupid. Only terrible things come out of her mouth. I wish she would just shut up. I couldn't take it out of the report, and I wanted to pull the hair of the person who wrote it, because I thought, really? But the ability to write brazen and bombastic comments is there in most tools. Yeah. For the integrity of it, we're really not supposed to take those out, but we are supposed to talk about them, or to identify an ombudsman, or if we ever feel like there's something bordering on violence in the workplace, or something of harassment or something like that. But you have to know what's in there, and you need to identify where comments support or are in conflict with the statistical rendering of the report. I did one yesterday where really low strategy, and 2 comments that said, great strategy, mind. And I went, what's happening here? Well, you could show up one way to one group and they have a line of sight to your behaviors, and you could show up differently to another, and in the aggregate that may not come out. So a best practice is to orient and train raters. There is tons of research around how to write a helpful comment, how to invest the right kind of time. An oriented group of raters who just get an email that says, we appreciate you taking the time and hope you'll follow these basic guidelines, or you listen to this 4-minute Zoom recording we added to your email here, to just give a little bit of context about what's helpful and not helpful. Now, from an instrument adaptation standpoint, you're going to see this be very different. Some people have made comments optional. Some instruments have given you an option to be able to write a comment for a specific competency or a specific knowledge, skill, or attribute. We believe in the ability to deliver the report in a successive section. So there are print options. So I can print the comments and do them in a successive session, as opposed to that one kit and caboodle. And there are a lot of people who are saying the TalentTelligent approach is great for leadership development groups, because we can do the tip of the iceberg and then we can dive deeper, and then we can add the comments in successive coaching. Another thing I really like is the stop, start, maintain categories of comments. We're getting much richer comments when we say, what should this person stop doing? What should they start doing? What do they overdo? Or categories that provide very rich commentary, like tune-ups or things like that are important. And so you're seeing people adapt the instruments to capture better data. And I think that in hindsight, if we were talking to Pierman and Eichinger, that is one of the big things that they did in their 360 instead of just a general freeform place. So, all right, I want to manage your time. I will send you the slides with the same formula around the last couple of ones here. Obviously, we believe that the learners should be selecting their raters, and we're not fans of sending the report ahead of time too early because that person will get a defense script in their head. You should put time on the back end to be able to answer questions and humanely bring somebody through the report and orient them through the report. And yes, direct reports, peers, others should have group anonymity, and their data should only be represented if it's in the aggregate fractionalized, as opposed to, oh, here's Joni and she stands alone. Only boss and self should stand alone in best practice. So you'll see I've got some sections there on that. But in terms of the handbook of 360, they really did pull out some really cool red threads, and that's purpose matters. You should be identifying what the purpose is of 360. And it's true. There are great debates about, is it for development only? It's for development mostly. And this idea that development is an important piece for really being a game changer. And then the idea around high potential identification. 360 is a really good tool to develop potential, but also to spot it. And we believe that as well. And we have a 360 application for high potential as well. They talk a lot in this book, and certainly Church and Burke talk about, there are a lot of well-intentioned organizations who cook up their own 360 and then later they regret it because their items are poorly written. They've got lopsided scales. You've got biased data and confidentiality breaches. And there is an overall collective thought process in this strategic handbook that 360 is here to stay. And even though I've attended a number of webinars about the impact of AI on coaching, they do believe that human trained professionals, there will always be a place for us there. So I absolutely love this book and the ability to talk about the things that are happening in the world of 360. And here are my citations for the things that I offered you today. I'll put that in your PowerPoint as well. And the other thing is looking at normative data, powerful competencies or KSA data. Having some sort of diagnostic tool is absolutely critical, some sort of norm-based to know, where is the person better than what you'd expect? Where are they less than what you expect? How's that for mean talking? But that ability to have that conversation is absolutely critical. So that's what our 360 looks like. We've got the card sorting that's part of that, as well as the DIY that supports coaches in their coaching endeavors. And here's all the sections of the report that you can have separately. So if you're interested in that, and Marie just was signing off here, but I think the approach to managing the tool and seeing that in the executive overview for TalentTelligent's key. So let me just open up the thing and just tell you guys, thanks for coming here. And next month we have a focus on development strategies. So we will talk more about executive tune-ups compared to individual contributor, more formalized IDPs and the lessons of experience and things like that. And then later we'll be talking about selection and interviewing in our cool new interview guide builder. Hey, Kyle Cordaway, tell me you're on Eastern Time or Central Standard Time, or
I was actually on Central Standard Time, thinking I was 2 minutes early.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's the way it goes.
Yeah, I've got this recorded. So
No worries.
So Tim, any surprises here? Is this what you thought you were going to hear? Any good reinforcements, or let me give you the last word, sir?
Oh, always love the geeking out the nerds, the citations, all 800 plus, and the distillation through the lens of your 500, plus experiences in terms of delivery. It's fascinating and challenging and stretching.
That's great. It's always nice to see you. So Dan, any final words for you, sir?
Yeah, I was gonna fill Kyle in on the session. Then is when I recognized who it was, he could probably fill me in on the session, even though he wasn't part of it.
I don't know about that, Dan, but that's kind of you to say.
Yeah, well, you've given away your big brain, so thanks for sharing.
Good one.
Keep sharing. I might get up to above that 100 threshold one of these days on IQ. Now,
It's pretty
I
fun.
was,
Well,
I'm going to talk a little inside. Yeah, are you off record? Or are you still recording?
not yet. So those of you who are listening to our recording, thank you for listening. I hope you join us for our next version in the next couple of months. Please register on the events site, and from everybody at TalentTelligent, have a great day. So I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to, where did that go? Got another joiner as well.